How do we know what we know in psychological science? Psychology is about a lot of things: emotion, trust, attitudes, cognition, persuasion, decision-making, perception, and neuroscience. Psychology is really not one field, it's a collection of many. Psychology has many faces. Here are some major subdivisions. Clinical psychologists diagnose and treat mental health problems and administer psychological tests. Martin Seligman, for example, is well known for his work on happiness in the subfield of positive psychology, which focuses on human strengths rather than frailties. Cognitive psychologists research human thought, language, and decision-making. Elizabeth Loftus is a cognitive psychologist who conducted groundbreaking work on the fallibility of human memory. Developmental psychologists study cognitive and emotional development across the lifespan. Carol Gilligan, for example, is well known for her research on moral development and gender. Evolutionary psychologists apply principles of natural and sexual selection to understanding modern human behavior. For example, Lida Cosmides helped found the field that integrates neuroscience, psychology, and evolutionary biology. Behavioral psychologists, like the very well-known B.F. Skinner, study how we acquire new behaviors. He radically transformed the way we think about the process of learning. Social psychologists like me study how people think about, are influenced by, and relate to other people. Sandra Bem, for example, is a pioneer in the field of gender studies, my own area of expertise. But all psychologists have one thing in common: we're social scientists who use the scientific method to explore human behavior and mental processes. I was recently asked to summarize my research in 10 words or less. I thought about it and said, women may be from Venus, but they work on Mars. I've been a social psychologist for 25 years, and there is definitely a theme that runs through all of my research. The world of work is a very different place for men and women. So today I'm going to talk about how psychologists ask and answer questions using examples from my own research on gender in the academic workplace. So how do psychologists ask and answer research questions? A research question or a hypothesis is usually based on theory or previous research, but often it begins with a hunch. My interest on gender in the academic workplace definitely stemmed from my personal experience. My husband and I are both psychology professors about the same age. We went to graduate school together and we work at the same university. At some point early in our careers, however, I realized that his experiences were often very different from mine. My students were more likely to call me by my first name or Mrs. Lampman, but they always called him Dr. Petratus. They were more likely to challenge my grading or course policies, and my students were more likely to interrupt me when I was speaking or be disrespectful. So how do psychologists ask and answer research questions? Well, it begins with a research question or hypothesis. Then we design a study and we gather empirical data. Then we analyze data and draw conclusions, and often reformulate and start all over again. Research designs in psychology typically fall into one of three major categories: description, correlation or prediction, and experimentation. I'm going to use some of my own research to illustrate each of these types of psychological research methods. So let's talk about descriptive research methods. The first step in understanding something about human behavior is to describe it. So what are some ways to observe whether women faculty are treated differently than men faculty by their students? Well, I could follow a bunch of professors around, sit in on their classes and their meetings with students, and see how students treat them. We call this naturalistic observation. It's a great way to do descriptive research. There are some problems with this approach, however. Student incivility is a low-frequency behavior. It's not every day a professor gets challenged or threatened by a student. So you'd have to follow around a lot of professors for weeks and weeks to observe even a single instance. Super labor-intensive and really expensive to do. A better approach would be to ask professors if they've experienced some of these behaviors and compare the responses of men and women faculty. So that's what I did. I conducted a national survey with a random sample of US professors. So one of the most important things in descriptive research is the method we use to draw the sample. You need a sample that will be representative. If I only survey professors I know, the sample will be biased. It'll contain more social scientists and more people who teach in Alaska. If your goal is to describe a behavior or experience within a population, you need to take a random sample. So how did I take a random sample of US professors? I went to a government website and found that there were 1,900 colleges and universities that offer a 4-year degree. I took a stratified random sample of 100 of them, 68 private and 32 public universities. Then I went to each university's website and I randomly selected 8 faculty members from each school and sent the online survey to 800 faculty. 524 people sent the survey back. That's a response rate of 66%. So is this sample perfect? No, it might overrepresent professors who had students harass them or professors willing to fill out a survey. No sample is ever perfect. The only perfect sample isn't a sample. You would need every professor in the US for it to be perfect, but it doesn't need to be. Research in the social science isn't about absolutes. It's about trends. No study will ever be 100% accurate and can't prove anything. But with replication and the help of statistics, we can get a pretty good picture of what's going on. So what did I ask the participants in this study? I asked them to indicate whether or not they had experienced many student behaviors in the last 12 months. I also asked them how many times it occurred. So for example, I asked them, in the last year, has a student challenged your authority during class? Has a student continually interrupted you during class? Questioned your credentials to teach a course? Created tension by dominating a discussion, made a hostile or threatening comment in class, made a threat or intimidating communication, yelled or screamed at you, submitted inappropriate or hostile course evaluations. When you take a look at the percentage of men versus women answering yes, it's hard not to notice something. The number for women is consistently larger than it is for men. So my hunch was supported. But this is just one study. How do we know that these gender differences are real? Are they significant, or are they just due to chance? Most psychologists use statistics to help us determine whether or not a research finding is likely to be replicated or just due to chance or random error. If I say that the gender difference in faculty reports of student incivility and bullying is statistically significant, it is like saying that the finding is likely to be repeated and is not a fluke. It's kind of like saying that if I drew 100 similar random samples from this population and repeated this analysis, only 5 times out of 100 would a gender difference this large be found by chance. Tests of statistical significance allow us to state that our finding is probably not a fluke and would likely occur if we repeated the study. So now let's move away from just talking about description and talk about prediction or correlation. Sometimes we want to actually test a hypothesis or make a prediction. For example, I suspected that in addition to women, faculty who are younger or less experienced would be more likely to report incivility and bullying behaviors from their students. This is an example of a scatter plot. On the horizontal axis is each faculty member's age, and on the vertical axis is a total incivility bullying score. Each dot in the plot represents the intersection of age and total incivility bullying score. So what can we observe looking at this scatter plot? Well, faculty who are younger report having experienced more incivility and bullying in the past year than faculty who are older. Age was a statistically significant predictor here. The gender difference we discussed earlier was also statistically significant. So both gender and age predict how likely faculty are to report incivility and bullying from their students. But can we say that being a woman or being younger causes this to happen? No. It's possible men and women get differing amounts of incivility and bullying because men and women tend to teach in different fields. Women are more likely to be professors in fields like education, nursing, and English, while men are more likely to be professors in fields like engineering and business. Likewise, we can't be sure that age is the issue. It might be experienced professors are less likely to be challenged. If you want to isolate a causal relationship between variables, you need to conduct an experiment. The term experiment probably brings to mind beakers and test tubes, but it's actually a really useful way to investigate psychological concepts as well. In fact, it's kind of the gold standard on research in the social sciences and in psychology. So how could we design an experiment to show that a faculty member's gender causes students to think differently about their credentials or qualifications? We can randomly assign a sample of college students to view one of 2 resumes and job applications from a psychologist who's applying for a job as a professor. So this graphic shows that we'll take a sample of participants, college students, We will randomly assign them to read either the male version of the job application or the female version of the job application, and after reviewing it, they will rate how qualified the person is for the job and how well their credentials make them a good candidate for the position. Everything is identical on these two job applications except a box that's checked that shows whether it came from a man or a woman. So let's say we found these results, that the college students who read about a male candidate rated their qualifications on a 10-point scale at around 8.3, and they rated their credentials as a good fit for the job at around 7.2. But those who read about a female candidate, how qualified was she? Well, the average there is 6.4, and the credentials average is 5.5. Participants randomly assigned to see the job application from a woman appeared to rate the candidate as significantly less qualified and their credentials as a poorer fit for the job than the male candidate. So can we state then that gender caused this difference? Yeah. Random assignment allowed us to isolate gender, so any differences could be attributed to that. Psychological research is aimed at understanding human behavior and mental processes. That's a lot of ground to cover. But all psychological research shares a common characteristic. It's based on the scientific method. Psychologists know what we know by always relying on empirical data. We might just be testing a hunch, but we always approach it as scientists with systematic data collection and analysis.